The mistake the Volanthi had never known war for 6,000 years. Their civilization had grown in peace across 12 beautiful worlds in the Orion Spur region of the galaxy. They were tall beings with silver skin and 4 hearts beating inside their slender chest. They created art that made other species weep with joy. They wrote poetry that took centuries to complete. They solved mathematical problems that had puzzled the galaxy for millions of years. But they had never built a single weapon. High Ambassador Saloon stood at the observation window of the Grand Council chamber on their homeworld of Volanthi. Prime, her large violet eyes watched the stars with growing terror 3 days ago. Those stars had brought death to her doorstep. The Corax Dominion had arrived without warning. 12,000 warships had dropped out of hyperspace and surrounded her world like hungry predators, circling wounded prey. The Corax were everything. The Volanthi were not. They were conquerors who had enslaved 11 species across 200 star systems. Their bodies were massive and covered in thick armored scales. Their eyes held no mercy, and no sole supreme commander, Thelvok, had sent only one message to the Volanthi people: surrender everything or die. There would be no negotiation. There would be no mercy. Volanthi had 3 days to accept total enslavement or face complete extinction. Sion turned away from the window and faced her. Council 12 of the wisest Volanthi in existence sat around a curved table made of crystal that had taken 400 years to grow there. Faces showed the same fear she felt in her 4 hearts. "We have sent messages to every species we know," said Elder Morvan, his voice trembling like leaves in a storm. The Thesari claimed they cannot intervene in external conflicts. The Dromar Federation expressed deep sympathy, but stated their fleet is committed elsewhere. Added Elder Desha. The Grox hierarchy did not respond at all, one by one. The council members reported the same terrible news. Nobody was coming to help them. The galaxy had looked at the Corax Armada and decided that the Volanthi were not worth dying for. Selene felt something she had never experienced before. It was cold and sharp, and it twisted inside her chest like a blade. She realized it was despair. There must be someone. She whispered, "We cannot be alone in this universe. There is no one." "High Ambassador," said Elder Morvan, "we have contacted every known species within range of our communication arrays." "Every known species," Saloon repeated. She looked up suddenly, as a thought struck her like lightning. What about the unknown ones? The council members exchanged confused glances. "High Ambassador, we cannot contact species we do not know exist," said Elder Desha. "Our communication arrays can reach hundreds of frequencies across the galaxy," Saloon said, her voice growing stronger. "We have only used the channels we know are monitored by established civilizations. What if we broadcast on all frequencies? That would be highly irregular." Elder Morvan protested. "Our translators are not calibrated for unknown languages. The message could be corrupted or misunderstood." "Then let it be misunderstood," Saloon said. She walked to the communication console at the center of the chamber. "We are facing extinction. My friends, if there is even the smallest chance that someone out there might help us, we must take it. What do we have to lose?" The council could not argue with her logic. They had nothing left to Lo Saloon programmed the distress signal herself. She wanted to ask for diplomatic intermediaries who could negotiate with the Corax on their behalf. She wanted to request peaceful intervention from any species willing to speak for them. The message she composed was careful and formal. It explained their situation and requested assistance in opening dialogue with their attackers. That the communication array was old. It had been built 3,000 years ago, when the Volanthi still remembered what fear meant. The translation matrices had not been updated for frequencies used by younger species when the signal scattered across the galaxy. It changed. The careful diplomatic language became something else entirely. Something raw and desperate and terrible on the far edge of the galaxy. In an unfashionable spiral arm that most species ignored, a small blue planet orbited an average yellow star the people of Earth had only discovered faster-than-light travel 80 years ago. They were considered primitives by galactic standards. Loud and emotional and obsessed with violence, other species avoided them when possible, but the communication satellite orbiting Earth's moon was very good at detecting signals. Lieutenant James Chun was on duty when the message arrived. He almost ignored it because the frequency was strange and the translation was broken, but something in the static made him pause. He ran the signal through every translation program. Earth possessed what emerged from the corrupted data made his blood turn cold. Message did not ask for diplomat sit, did not request peaceful intervention. What Earth received was this: they are killing us and we cannot stop them. They are coming for our children. Please, anyone who can hear this, we are begging you. Help us, Lieutenant. Chen's hand shook as he contacted his commanding officer. Within 1 hour, the message had reached United Earth Command within 2 hours. It sat on the desk of Admiral Helena Vance. She was 57 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too much death. She had fought in the Mars Uprising and the Belt Rebellion and the terrible AI war that had nearly ended human civilization. She knew what war looked like. She knew what it cost, and she knew what it meant when someone cried out for help and the universe stayed silent. Admiral Vance read the message 3 times. Then she stood up and walked into the command chamber, where the leaders of Earth's military forces were already gathering. They looked at her with questions in their eyes. She looked back at them with fire in hers. How far? She asked. Approximately 4,000 light years, replied General Morrison. We could reach them in 6 days with the entire fleet at maximum speed. We know nothing about these Volanti, warned Admiral Okonkwo. We know nothing about their enemies. This could be a trap. We would be committing our forces to a conflict on the other side of the galaxy with no intelligence and no support. Admiral Vance listened to all the objections. They were valid and logical and completely beside the point. Someone is killing children, she said quietly. The room went silent. Someone out there is scared and alone and begging for help. They sent a message into the void, hoping anyone would answer. We heard them. She looked around at the faces of her fellow officers. If we do not go, who will? No one spoke, no one needed to. They all knew what humanity was. They all knew what humanity had always been. Admiral Vance gave the order. Spin up the entire fleet. We leave in 4 hours. On the other side of the galaxy, High Ambassador Saloon waited for a response that she believed would never come. She had no way of knowing that 432 warships were already preparing to tear across the star. She had no way of knowing that humanity had heard her cry, and humanity was coming with fury in their hearts and fire in their hands. The Volanthi had asked for diplomats. The universe had sent them something else entirely. The universe had sent them Earth. What they didn't know, the galaxy had ignored humanity for a very good reason. Earth was located in a spiral arm that most star maps did not even bother to name. The planet was small and blue and orbited a star so ordinary that astronomers called it unremarkable. When humans finally developed faster-than-light travel 80 years ago, the older species of the galaxy had taken one look at them and decided they were not worth noticing. The Sari thought humans were too emotional to be trusted. The Dromar Federation considered them too violent to be civilized. The Grox hierarchy did not think about them at all. Humans were classified as a primitive species that would probably destroy themselves within a few centuries. Nobody expected them to matter. Nobody understood what they truly were. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the bridge of the U's Unconquered, the flagship of the United Earth Fleet. Around her, 432 warships were completing their final preparations for the jump to hyperspace. These ships were not beautiful. The Zazari built vessels that looked like flowing works. Of art, the Dromar created ships with elegant curves and gleaming surfaces. Human ships looked like they had been designed by people who expected to be shot at because they had been the U.S. Unconquered was 3 kilometers of armored steel and reinforced bulkheads. It had no windows because windows were weak points. It had no decorations because decorations served no purpose in battle. Every centimeter of its hull was covered in weapons or armor or sensor arrays. The ship had been built with a single question in mind. What if something wants to kill us, and how do we kill it first? This was the question humanity had been asking since the first human picked up a rock and realized it could be used to break skulls. 10,000 years of warfare on Earth had taught humans lessons that other species had never needed to learn. They had fought wars over land and water and food. They had fought wars over ideas and beliefs in gods. They had fought wars over pride and revenge and hatred. They had even fought wars for no reason at all, except that fighting was what they knew how to do. Every generation had added to the terrible knowledge of how to end lives. The sword gave way to the gun gave way to the bomb gave way to weapons that could turn entire cities into glass when humans finally stopped fighting each other and united under one government. They did not forget what they had learned. They looked up at the stars and asked themselves a new question. What if something up there is as violent as we are, and what if they come for us first? The United Earth Fleet was the answer to that question. It was not built for exploration. It was not built for trade. It was built to wage war across the stars with the accumulated knowledge of 10,000 years of human conflict. The other species had given up on certain weapons because they were too destructive. Or too cruel. Humans had perfected those weapons because cruelty and destruction were the point. Plasma cannons on Earth's ships burned at temperatures that other species thought impossible. The kinetic rounds they fired could punch through shields designed to stop energy weapons. The electronic warfare systems could drive enemy crews insane with phantom signals and false readings. And when all else failed, human ships were designed to ram because humans would rather die killing their enemies than live knowing they had fled. Admiral Vance watched the fleet status display as ship after ship reported ready for departure. She thought about the message they had received. Someone was killing children. Someone was hurting innocent people who had done nothing wrong. It did not matter that the Volanthi were strangers. It did not matter that Earth had no alliance with them and no obligation to help them. What mattered was that someone had cried out in the darkness and humanity had heard them. Admiral, said Captain Rodriguez, her second in command, we have a problem. Vance turned to face him. What kind of problem? Intelligence has been analyzing the distress signal, Rodriguez said. They've identified the attackers as the Corax Dominion. I have never heard of them. Neither had anyone else until an hour ago. Rodriguez replied, we found references to them in old Dasari databases. They are a conquering species that has enslaved 11 civilizations across 200 star systems. Their fleet is estimated at 15,000 warships. Vance considered this information. How many ships are attacking the Volanthi? Our best estimate is 12,000. The bridge fell silent. 432 ships against 12,000. The math was not complicated. Every officer on the bridge understood what those numbers meant. Admiral, Rodriguez said carefully, this is effectively a suicide mission. We would be outnumbered nearly 30-1. Even if we fight perfectly, we cannot win. Vance looked at her second in command with eyes that held no fear. Captain, do you know why? Other species think humans are primitive. Rodriguez shook his head. Because we fight like we are already dead. Vance said, other species calculate odds and measure advantages and retreat when the numbers turn against them. Humans do not. When someone we care about is in danger, we stop calculating. We stop measuring. We attack with everything we have. And we do not stop until we win or until there is nothing left of us. The Corax have 12,000 ships. We have 432, but we have something they do not have. What is that? Admiral Vance smiled, and it was not a friendly smile. We have absolutely nothing to lose, and we have every reason to make them pay for every life they have taken. She turned to the communications officer. Open a channel to the fleet. I, Admiral Vance's voice echoed through 432 ships. This is Admiral Vance speaking. In 6 days, we will arrive at a world called Volanti Prime. Innocent people are being threatened by a species that believes might makes right. They believe that because they have more ships, they can do whatever they want. They are about to learn what happens when you threaten civilians in front of humanity. I will not lie to you. We are outnumbered. Many of us will not come home. But the people we are going to save do not have anyone else. They called out for help, and we are the only ones who answered. So, we are going to show the galaxy what humans do when someone asks us for help. We answer, and we bring hell with us. The fleet jumped to hyperspace. 432 ships, carrying 50,000 humans, tore across the galaxy at speeds that bent the laws of physics. They were going to war against an enemy they had never met, to save people they had never known. This was what the galaxy did not understand about humanity. Other species fought for territory or resources or survival. Humans fought for strangers. They fought for the idea that no one should have to face evil alone. They fought because something deep inside them refused to look away when innocent people suffered. The Corax Dominion had conquered 11 species. They had never lost a war. They had never met an enemy who fought without caring if they lived or died. They had never met humanity in 6 days. They would learn what the galaxy had overlooked for so long. Humans were not primitive. They were simply patient, and when they finally decided to fight, nothing in the universe could stand against the fury of a species born in blood and fire and endless war. The stars themselves seemed to tremble as Earth's fleet raced toward the battle that would change everything. The Volanti had called for help. Humanity had answered, and the Corax Dominion was about to discover why the rest of the galaxy had always been a little bit afraid of the strange violent creatures from that unremarkable blue planet. Fear was about to become understanding, and understanding was about to become terror. The Fury Supreme Commander Thelvok stood on the command deck of his flagship and watched the Volanti. Homeworld burn smoke rose from a dozen cities where his troops had begun their work. The Volanti had no weapons to fight back. They had no ships. To escape, they could only watch as their civilization was torn apart piece by piece. Thelvok felt nothing but contempt for these weak creatures. They had built beautiful things, had written poetry, and solved mathematical problems. But they had never learned the most important lesson the universe had to teach. Power was the only thing that mattered. The strong took what they wanted, and the weak suffered what they must. His scales shifted with satisfaction as he reviewed the reports from his fleet. 12,000 ships surrounded Volanti Prime in a formation that allowed no escape ground. Forces were already rounding up civilians for processing within a week. The entire Volanti species would be slaves of the Dominion's Supreme Commander. Called his sensor officer. We are detecting hyperspace signatures at the edge of the system. Thelvok turned with mild curiosity. How many ships? Approximately 400. Supreme Commander. Configuration unknown. They do not match any species in our database. 400 ships. Thelvok made a sound that was the Corax equivalent of laughter. Someone has come to die with the Volanti, he said. How noble, how stupid. Identify them and prepare to destroy them. The sensor officer worked his console for a moment. They are broadcasting an identification signal. Supreme Commander. They call themselves humans. They are from a planet called Earth in the outer spiral arm. I have never heard of them. Neither has our database. Supreme Commander. There is very little information available. They are classified as a primitive species of no strategic importance. Thelvok dismissed the new arrivals from his mind. Send 800 ships to destroy them. That should be more than sufficient for primitives. Save some of them for interrogation. I want to know why they thought they could challenge the Dominion. The first wave of Korax ships accelerated toward the human fleet. They moved with the confidence of predators who had never known defeat, their weapons charged and their shields activated, and they prepared to crush this foolish resistance on the bridge of the UE's unconquered. Admiral Vance watched them come. 800 ships. Captain Rodriguez reported. They are treating us like an annoyance. Good. Vance replied. Let them underestimate us. All ships, prepare for combat. Execute Formation Omega 7. The human fleet did not scatter. It did not retreat. It did not try to negotiate or surrender or flee instead. It accelerated directly toward the enemy. The Korax commander of the first wave expected the humans to break formation when they realized they were outmatched. They did not break. He expected them to slow down when they entered weapons range. They sped up. He expected them to show fear. They showed nothing but fury. The first exchange of fire was unlike anything the Korax had ever experienced. Human plasma cannons burned at temperatures that melted through Korax shields like they were made of paper. Kinetic rounds punched through armor designed to stop energy weapons. Electronic warfare systems filled Korax sensors with ghosts and phantoms that drove targeting computers insane. But what terrified the Korax most was how the humans fought a Korax ship that took heavy damage would retreat to repair. A human ship that took heavy damage kept fighting when their weapons failed. They rammed when their engines died. They overloaded their reactors and took enemies with them. Humans fought like creatures who had already accepted death and simply wanted to take as many enemies with them as possible. Within 1 hour, the first Korax wave was crippled. Within 3 hours, it was destroyed, not driven away, not defeated. Destroyed. 800 ships reduced to burning wreckage by 400 human vessels. Supreme Commander Thelvok stared at his tactical display and felt something he had not experienced in decades. He felt uncertain. What happened? He demanded. How did they destroy an entire attack wave? His officers had no answers. They had never seen anything fight the way humans fought. Send 2,000 ships, Thelvok ordered. Crush them completely. The second wave attacked with overwhelming force, but the humans had learned from the first engagement. They knew where the Korax were weak. They knew where their shields failed and where their armor was thin, and they showed no mercy. Admiral Vance coordinated the battle from her command chair, her voice calm and steady as she directed 400 ships against 2,000. Wolfpack 7. Target their engine sections. Dragon Squadron, focus fire on their command ship. Hammer Group, prepare ramming maneuvers on my signal. The battle became a nightmare for the Korax. Human ships wove through their formations with reckless speed. They took damage that should have been fatal and kept fighting. They fired weapons that had been designed by a species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to kill one human destroyer. Its weapons destroyed and its engines failing, accelerated directly into a Korax cruiser 10 times its size. The captain's last transmission was simple, for Earth and for the innocent. The explosion destroyed both ships and damaged 3 more Korax vessels. This happened again and again. Human crews chose death over retreat. They chose to take their enemies with them rather than survive without victory. The second Korax wave crumbled. 4,000 ships had attacked, barely 1,000 escaped. Admiral Vance opened a communication channel that broadcast on all frequencies. This is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Earth Fleet. You are engaged in the massacre of civilians. You have 60 seconds to power down weapons and surrender your fleet unconditionally. This is not a negotiation. There will not be a second warning on his flagship. Supreme Commander Thelvok listened to the message. Had lost nearly 3,000 ships to 400 human vessels. His legendary fleet was being torn apart by primitives. For a moment, he considered retreat. He had never retreated in his life. His pride would not allow it. All ships. He commanded, attack, destroy every human vessel. Leave none alive. The remaining 8,000 Korax ships surged forward, and the human fleet met them without hesitation. What followed was not a battle, it was a slaughter. But the galaxy would argue for centuries about who was slaughtering whom. Human ships died by the dozens, but Korax ships died by the hundreds. Every human vessel that fell took enemies with it. Every human crew that perished made the Korax pay in blood and fire. Admiral Vance lost ships and friends and people she had known for decades. She felt each loss like a knife in her heart. But she did not stop. She could not stop because somewhere on the planet below, innocent people were waiting for someone to save them, and humanity had promised to answer their call. The battle raged for 6 days. 6 days of constant fighting and dying and killing. 6 days of fury and fire and blood. When it was finally over, 93 human ships had been destroyed. 140 more were too damaged to fight, but the Korax Dominion fleet was broken of 12,000 ships. Barely 2,000 remained, and those survivors were surrounded by human vessels. With weapons charged and crews hungry for vengeance, Admiral Vance sent one final transmission: surrender or extinction. Choose now. Supreme Commander Thelvok looked at the wreckage of his fleet. He looked at the human ships that had fought with the fury of demons, and for the first time in his long and bloody life, he felt true fear. The primitives had done the impossible. The primitives had defeated him. The galaxy would never be the same. The reckoning Supreme Commander Thelvok stood on his damaged bridge and stared at the tactical displayed 2,000 ships. That was all that remained of the greatest fleet the Dominion had ever assembled. 12,000 warships had come to conquer a peaceful world. Now 10,000 of them were burning debris scattered across the Volanti system, and the humans were waiting. Their ships surrounded his remaining forces like wolves circling wounded prey. They had taken terrible losses themselves, but they did not retreat. They did not celebrate. They simply waited for his answer: surrender or extinction. Thelf had never surrendered in 40 years of conquest. He had never even considered the possibility. He was Supreme Commander of the Korax Dominion. He had crushed 11 species beneath his heel. He would not kneel to primitives from an unknown world. All ships, he commanded, break formation and retreat to hyperspace. We will return with reinforcements. His officers hesitated. Supreme Commander, the humans have positioned ships behind us. They are blocking our escape routes. Thelvok felt cold rage building in his chest. The humans had anticipated his cowardice. They had known he would try to run, and they had made certain he could not. Then we fight through them, he snarled. Attack the ships blocking our retreat. Destroy them and escape. The remaining Korax ships surged toward the human vessels, blocking their path, but the humans were ready. They had been ready since the battle began. Admiral Vance had studied her enemy for 6 days. She knew how the Korax thought. She knew they would never truly surrender. She knew they would try to escape and return with more forces, so she had prepared a trap. The ships blocking the retreat were not her weakest vessels. They were her strongest, the ones that had taken the least damage, the ones with the most ammunition remaining, the ones crewed by men and women who had watched their friends die and wanted nothing more than vengeance. The Korax ran directly into a wall of fire. Human weapons tore through their formation. Ships that had survived the main battle now died trying to flee. Thelvok watched his fleet shrink from 2,000 to 1,000 to 500. Supreme Commander, his tactical officer cried, "We cannot break through. We are trapped." Thelvok looked at the display and finally understood the truth. He was not going to escape. He was not going to return with reinforcements. He was going to die here, in this system, destroyed by a species he had dismissed as primitives. His pride crumbled, his arrogance shattered. for the first time in his life. Supreme Commander Thelvok felt genuine despair. "All ships," he said. His voice hollow, "power down weapons, lower shields, signal our surrender." The Corax fleet went dark. 500 ships that had terrorized the galaxy for generations now floated silent and defeated. Admiral Vance received the surrender signal and allowed herself one moment of exhaustion. Entity 3 ships lost, over 12,000 human lives gone, friends and colleagues and fellow warriors who would never go home. The cost had been terrible, but they had won. "This is Admiral Vance to all human vessels," she transmitted. "The enemy has surrendered. Lower weapons, but maintain alert status. Dispatch boarding teams to secure Corax vessels. And someone get me a line to the Volanti surface. We need to let them know the war is over on Volanti Prime." High Ambassador Saloon had spent 6 days in terror. The Corax ground forces had been conducting their brutal work when the human fleet arrived. When the battle began in orbit, the Corax soldiers had stopped their attacks and looked up at the sky with confusion. Then they had received new orders and retreated to their landing craft for 6 days. Saloon and her people had watched flashes of light in the sky, explosions so bright they could be seen during the day, ships dying by the thousands in the void above their world. They had no way of knowing who was winning. They had no way of knowing if anyone would survive when the Corax ground forces suddenly lifted off and returned to orbit. Saloon felt hope for the first time when the communication signal came from the human flagship. She felt joy. "This is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Earth Fleet. High Ambassador Ceylon, the Corax fleet has surrendered. Your world is safe." Ceylon wept, for crystalline tears ran down her silver face as 6,000 years of peace nearly ended in fire and slavery. Her people gathered around her, all of them crying, all of them unable to believe what they were hearing. Someone had come, someone had heard their call and crossed the galaxy to save them. Someone had faced impossible odds and won. "Admiral Vance," Selen managed to say, "I do not have words. You saved us. You saved all of us." There was a pause before the human responded. "High Ambassador, may I have permission to bring my command staff to the surface? I think we have a lot to discuss." 3 hours later, a human shuttle landed on the steps of the Grand Council chamber. Admiral Vance descended the ramp with 5 of her officers behind her. She looked tired. Her uniform was stained with smoke and blood from the battle. A bandage covered a wound on her forehead where debris had struck her during an explosion on the bridge, but she stood straight and walked with purpose. "High Ambassador." Saloon met her at the base of the steps. The 2 leaders faced each other, one tall and silver and graceful, one shorter and scarred and carrying the weight of thousands of deaths on her shoulders. Selian spoke first. "Admiral Vance, the Volanti Collective owes you a debt we can never repay. You came to our aid when no one else would. You sacrificed your people to save ours. Why? Why did you do this?" Vance looked at the ambassador with eyes that had seen too much death. "You asked for help," she said simply, "but we did not know each other. We had no alliance. We had nothing to offer you. You risked everything for strangers." Vance was quiet for a moment when she spoke. Her voice was softer. "High Ambassador, do you know what humans are? We are a species born in blood. We spent our entire existence fighting each other. We killed millions of our own kind over land and resources and ideas. We created weapons capable of destroying our entire world. We came very close to ending ourselves. Many times," she paused, "but we also learned something important. We learned what it means when innocent people cry for help and nobody comes. We learned how it feels to be alone and afraid. We learned the cost of looking away when evil happens. Your people sent a message into the void. You said they were killing your children. You said you were begging for anyone to help. We heard you, and we could not look away." Saloon stared at the human admiral. She had thought humans were violent primitives. She had thought they were dangerous and unpredictable. She had not understood they were not violent because they enjoyed killing. They were violent because they refused to let innocent people suffer there. Fury was not mindless, it was purposeful, it was protection. The fury was not mindless, it was purposeful, it was mindless, it was purposeful, it was protection. Translation was corrupted. Saloon admitted, "We did not mean to send that message. We were asking for diplomats to negotiate on our behalf." Admiral Vance smiled, and there was warmth in it despite her exhaustion. Maybe the universe gave you what you actually needed instead of what you asked for. Maybe it knew that diplomacy would not stop the Corax. Maybe it knew you needed warriors. And maybe it knew that humans can never ignore a call for help. Saloon reached out and took the Admiral's hand. It was warm and calloused, and strong, the hand of someone who had fought and bled and killed to protect people she had never met. "Whatever your reasons," Saloon said, "you saved us, and the Volante Collective will never forget." Admiral Vance squeezed her hand gently. "Neither will we above them." The stars that had brought death now held the wreckage of a conquered conqueror, and the galaxy began to understand that humanity was awake. The reckoning had begun. The galaxy learns news travels fast across the stars. Within days of the Battle of Volante Prime, every species in the galaxy knew what had happened. The Corax Dominion, the unconquerable empire that had enslaved 11 civilizations, had been broken there. Greatest fleet had been destroyed. Their supreme commander had surrendered. It had been done by a species that most of the galaxy had never heard of: the humans. The primitives from an unremarkable world in an unimportant spiral armed the violent emotional. Creatures that everyone had dismissed as irrelevant. They had crossed 4,000 light years to answer a stranger's cry for help, and they had brought the fury of a warrior species with them. The effects were immediate and devastating for the Corax across 200 star systems. Slave populations heard the news and rose up. If the Dominion could be defeated, they could be defied. If the mighty Corax could fall, they could be overthrown. Rebellions erupted on every world. The Dominion controlled species that had been crushed for generations found their courage. They fought back with whatever they had because they finally believed victory was possible. Within 3 months, the Corax Dominion collapsed. Their remaining fleets were too scattered to respond to every uprising. Their commanders were too demoralized to fight effectively. The empire that had terrorized a region of space for centuries crumbled into nothing all because 400 human ships had refused to look away from suffering. The Volante Collective formally proposed an alliance with Earth 6 weeks after the battle. High Ambassador Saloon traveled to Earth herself to present the offer. She stood before the United Nations and spoke to the leaders of humanity. "My people have never known war," she said. "We have spent 6,000 years in peace. We built beautiful things and created art and solved problems. But we never understood that the universe contains darkness. We never prepared for the possibility that evil would come for us. When it did, we had no way to defend ourselves. We sent a cry into the void, hoping someone would hear. You heard us. You came to save us when no one else would. You sacrificed your people to protect ours. I stand before you today not to ask for an alliance of convenience. I am here to ask for something deeper. I am asking humanity to be our protectors, our guardians, our friends." The chamber was silent. Admiral Vance, now promoted to Fleet Marshal, sat in the gallery watching. She thought about the 93 ships they had lost, 12,000 lives that had ended in fire and vacuum, families that would never see their loved ones again. Had it been worth it? She looked at the Volante ambassador, tall and graceful and alive. She thought about the millions of Volante who would have been enslaved or killed if humanity had not answered. She thought about the 11 species now rising up against their oppressors because humans had shown them it was possible. Yes, it had been worth it. It would always be worth it. The alliance was approved unanimously. Earth and Volante Prime became partners in a bond that went deeper than politics or economics. The Volante offered their knowledge, their science, Our humanity offered something the Volanthi had never had. Protection. News of the Alliance spread across the galaxy. Other species watched with interest and fear. The Thesari sent diplomatic envoys to Earth, hoping to establish relations with this dangerous new power. The Dromar Federation requested permission to send observers to human space. Even the Grox hierarchy, who had ignored humanity for decades, suddenly wanted to know more about these violent creatures. But it was the smaller species who reacted most strongly. The weak ones, the ones who had no fleets and no weapons and no way to defend themselves. They began sending messages to Earth, not requests for alliance or trade agreements, calls for help. A mining colony threatened by pirates sent a desperate transmission. Earth responded with 2 frigates that arrived within a week and destroyed the pirate fleet. A peaceful species being bullied by their aggressive neighbors asked for protection. Earth sent a diplomatic envoy backed by a carrier group, and the aggressive neighbors suddenly became very reasonable. A research station detected an approaching asteroid that would destroy their world. Earth sent engineering ships that diverted it, and then stayed to help build better detection systems each time someone called for help. Humanity answered. Fleet Marshal Vance established the Rapid Response Force, a specialized fleet designed to reach distant systems quickly and provide assistance. The crews were volunteers, people who had heard what happened at Volanthi Prime and wanted to be part of something that mattered. They called themselves the Guardians. The galaxy had never seen anything like it. Other species fought for territory or resources or power. Humanity fought for strangers. They fought because they remembered their own history. They remembered the genocides and the wars, and the times when innocent people had cried for help and no one had come. They refused to let that happen to others. They refused to look away. In years after the Battle of Volanthi Prime, Fleet Marshal Vance was invited to address the Galactic Council. It was the first time a human had been permitted to speak to the assembled representatives of the galaxy's major powers. She stood at the podium and looked out at a chamber filled with beings from 100 different species. Some of them had feared humanities. Some of them still did. All of them wanted to understand. You look at us, and you see violence. Vance began. You see a species that spent its entire history learning how to kill. You see warriors and fighters and dangerous creatures. And you are right. We are all of those things. But you do not understand why. Humans fight because we remember what it is like to have no one fight for us. We remember our own genocides. We remember our own wars. We remember the unanswered cries of our own people. We will not let others suffer that silence. Not while we draw breath. Not while our ships can fly. You called us primitives. You said we were too violent to be civilized. But we have learned something that many of you have forgotten. Violence without purpose is savagery. Violence in defense of the innocent is justice. We know the difference. We have always known the difference. The Volanthi called for help 10 years ago. We answered. Others have called since then. We have answered every time. And we will continue to answer. Because that is what humanity does. That is who we are. We are the ones who come when you call. We are the fury that answers the cries of the innocent. We are the guardians the galaxy did not know it needed. She paused and looked around the chamber. Some of you will never trust us. Some of you will always fear us. That is your choice. But know this. If your people are ever threatened, if your worlds are ever in danger, if you ever find yourself facing darkness and despair, send a message to Earth. We will hear you, and we will come. The chamber was silent then. Slowly, the Volanthi ambassador rose to her feet. She began to applaud, her 4 hands creating a sound like gentle rain. Others joined her. The Zasari representatives stood. The freed species from the former Karax dominion rose one by one. The chamber filled with the sound of appreciation and respect. Not everyone stood. Not everyone trusted humanity, but everyone understood. The galaxy had mistakenly awakened the sleeping giant. They had called out into the void, and something had answered, something fierce and terrible and beautiful, something that would fight and die for complete strangers, something that refused to let innocent people suffer alone. Humanity had found its purpose among the stars. They were the answer to every desperate cry. They were the fury that protected the weak. They were the guardians the universe had always needed, but never knew it wanted. They would never stop answering the call, because that was who they were. That was who they had always been. That was who they would always. Baby stars belonged to everyone now, and humanity would make sure it stayed that way forever.